The year is 2011. Ignore the Wii U games and amiibo behind me, it's really 2011, trust me. The 3DS had just recently released in Japan, and us Westerners were hotly anticipating Nintendo's brand new handheld console. And like I've said many times in the past, a new handheld always brings with it a new Pokemon game. What? Get out of here! Didn't you hear me when I said it was 2011? The DS is old news, pal. Okay, fine, we'll talk about Pokemon Black and White. Yeah, the Generation 5 Pokemon games were certainly oddballs. Releasing at the very tail end of the DS's life, Pokemon Black and White were the first Pokemon games to release on the same console as the previous generation. And with that being the case, it unfortunately meant that it was hard to really get excited about these games at the time. Each generation before brought with their updated graphics, a rearranged UI, and incorporated features that took advantage of the new hardware that they were on. These things helped breathe new life into the series with each new entry, despite the core mechanics remaining pretty much the same. One worry I had when these games were announced is that they would feel too similar to the previous DS games to really justify their existence, but they don't. The Generation 5 games definitely feel like a brand new generation. Granted, the art style is mostly identical to the Gen 4 games, but there are a bunch of new visual features that separate them. Of course, we have battles, where static sprites are a thing of the past. Pokemon now animate in battles. Granted, this is pretty much only idle animations, but I imagine taking the time to do this for 649 different Pokemon would have been a tall order. It looks great nonetheless and provides some more personality to the Pokemon. Animations and graphics for moves were completely redone for these games too, as you'd hope to see in a new generation. The camera scrolls around a lot in battles now, zooming in and out on each Pokemon depending on what the focus is. All of these enhanced visual features help make the battles more engaging. Outside of battles, the visual scope was expanded. There are many more 3D elements to be seen or interacted with. In some areas, the camera will shift as you run through it, making for a more cinematic moment, and giving the world of Unova a grander scale. Then there's Castelia City, a sprawling location and the biggest city seen in a Pokemon game at the time of its release. In some areas of the city, the traditional top-down camera is swapped for something more behind the shoulder, and is zoomed out to showcase the height of the skyscrapers. This all looks rather nice for a DS game that is mostly 2D, and I enjoyed the dynamic nature of the camera in certain areas. But that's it, it's only certain areas where this occurs. It's certainly cool, and I would have loved to have seen more varied camera angles throughout the entire world. Another visual element that sets it apart from the Gen 4 games is the 3D cutscenes. Again, they're few and far between, to be expected of a DS game, but when they occur, they do a great job of enhancing the atmosphere and the intensity of what is happening in the story at that point. And boy is it one intense story. I wouldn't hesitate to say that this is the most intense Pokemon story of all the games. Team Rocket, Team Magma and Aqua, Team Galactic, they're all about using Pokemon for their own selfish desires, or ruling the world, or something along those lines. Team Plasma? Pokemon liberation. Humans are dumb. Pokemon rule. Y'all better stop that animal abuse or I'll murder you. Maybe they don't go that far, but their goal is essentially to eradicate the so-called unworking relationship between man and Pokemon by any means necessary. Most of the times this means using Pokemon to battle against you, and I don't know about that one. As the player gets further into the game, the plot begins to thicken as more is revealed about Team Plasma's true goals, how they wish to achieve them, and the motives behind the men in the big chairs. Team Plasma isn't just a group and a leader, it's a group, 7 leaders, and a king. Are they villains or anti-heroes? Who knows? These are questions that are brought up throughout the story, and the answers are provided in satisfying ways. In all Pokemon games to this point, including Black and White, there are 2 plot threads. One driven by the evil team, and one involving the player's objective of collecting all of the gym badges and becoming the champion. In prior games, these plot threads will connect once or twice, but they are mostly separated. Black and White succeeds in that these 2 plot threads are connected throughout your entire journey. Your interactions with the gym leaders and access to the gyms almost always revolves around the activity of Team Plasma. The gym leaders aid the protagonists on their quest far more than they ever had before. They are fully fleshed out characters that are baked into the story, making them some of the most memorable gym leaders in the series. But we're not done there with the praise. Your rivals in these games, Cheren and Bianca, are handled fantastically. The game opens with the 3 of you obtaining your first Pokemon, having a scuffle in your room, and then heading on your journey together. Cheren and Bianca's personalities are strong and their flaws evident. Cheren is determined but judgmental and impatient. Bianca is kind but self-conscious and has major family issues. Cheren and Bianca both have different reasons for wanting to become stronger, and those reasons morph as the story progresses, as revelations are made and as the characters grow. They are both wonderful characters and are my favourite rivals in the whole series. Bianca in particular, her dialogue is just so endearing. And of course, I can't forget about the pretty anime boy himself, N, a fan favourite. He's a mysterious, damaged individual with a rather dark past which, unlike the rival from the Generation 2 games, is actually explored in the game he originated in. Learning about it and seeing how the character acts on it is done in a satisfying way. Oh, and if Steven is Bay and Cynthia is Bea, N is Bayonetta. He hot. The story remains exciting throughout the whole game and certainly doesn't slow down towards the end where it all comes to a head. Usually in Pokemon games the evil team thread has seen its conclusion before the fight with the Elite Four, but not in Black and White. It keeps on going right until the credits roll, culminating in one epic finale. And to complement the greatness of the story, we have one of the best soundtracks in the entire series. Maybe the best. I always go back and forth between whether I prefer Gen 2 or Gen 5 soundtracks, but one thing's for certain, it is excellent. The endless battles against Team Plasma Grunts is kept entertaining thanks to their rocking theme. In fact, all of the many battle themes are wonderful, especially that of the Elite Four and the other unique themes played during important story battles. And special shout out to some of the event background music, without which the cutscenes and moments of dialogue would not be nearly as impactful. The story and characters in the Generation 5 games are phenomenal. I like the characters in prior Pokemon games, but I never really felt for them. In Pokemon Black and White, I did feel for these characters, which is especially impressive as there are a ton of them, and they all get their moments to shine. The writers went all in on the seriousness of the plot and incorporated many interesting themes, and I think it definitely paid off. I feel that the direction that the story went in was something to reel in people who had played the older games, as it was one way to make this game stand out from the others. Many other parts of the games gave me the impression that the devs were trying to attract and ease in new players who had never played Pokemon before. One thing that gives me this impression is the fact that the only accessible Pokemon throughout Black and White's main scenario are the new Gen 5 Pokemon. No old ones, not a single one, nada, not even Pikachu. There are around 150 new Pokemon and that's your lot. Quite the departure. In an interview with Eurogamer, the game's director, Junichi Masuda, explained that this was to make the games feel fresh. But I wonder if this was more of a refresh and a tactic to draw in new players. Cut the amount of available Pokemon to something more akin to the original. As for the new Pokemon, I remember Gen 5 being the point in which people were questioning whether Game Freak were running out of ideas and began including everything but the kitchen sink. They did manage to include the kitchen stink though, you know what I'm saying? It was likely a lot of these inanimate object Pokemon, such as the Clink line and Trubbish line, that gave people this impression. But I don't know, this is really something that comes down to personal preference. Do you know who are two of my favourite Pokemon from Gen 5? Chandelure and Vanillux. Oh, and would you look at that? They're based on inanimate objects. It's some of the other ones that I find uninspiring and forgettable, like Vullaby and Stunfisk. Having said that, I'm sure they are some people's favourites. Like I said, it's all personal preference. This gen's Pokemon designs are fine by me, but if you hate them, no worries. So with the all new cast of critters, the other thing that makes me think this game catered to new players is the first gym. The type of the gym changes depending on which starter Pokemon you chose, and will be the type that is strong against your starter. Towards the beginning of the game, you're gifted either a Pansage, Pansear or Panpour depending on your starter, and the type of this Pokemon will correspond to the type that the first gym is weak against. I see this as a way of teaching players how Pokemon types work, a concept that people may be unfamiliar with if they've never played a Pokemon game before. However, I could be wrong about these games being aimed at new players, as the difficulty ramps up a tad around the second gym. Even with a fighting type Pokemon, I did have some trouble taking down the second gym's strong normal Pokemon. This difficulty spike feels out of place, as most of the game after that point feels like your standard Pokemon affair. If their goal was to bring in new players, the game should have been easier towards the start and not at the end. Actually, this should just be the case anyway. While there are areas of the game that feel aimed at new players, the Gen 5 games obviously weren't abandoning their hardcore fanbase. A new world with new Pokemon is cool and all, but these games also needed some new gameplay features to make them feel like a worthwhile purchase for veterans. Alright, so let's start with what's new for battles. First up, we've got wild double battles. Walking through dark grass will result in higher level wild Pokemon encounters. There's also a chance that two Pokemon can attack at once. This is cool because not only does it make leveling up multiple Pokemon at once a bit easier, but also gives the player a slightly higher chance of bumping into rarer Pokemon. I've always been a big fan of double battles, and this is a nice addition. Along with the new EXP distribution calculation and the free lucky egg, which increases experience earned, leveling your Pokemon is now easier than ever. And well, yes, of course I'll take that. Next up we have the critical capture, which is something that you may never actually encounter if you're just running through the story, but is a neat feature nonetheless. Upon throwing a ball at a Pokemon, there's a small chance that the ball will only have to shake once, making it much more likely to end with a successful catch. The rate at which critical capture occurs increases as the player fills their Pokedex, making it easier to nab the last few. Hey, it's not a crazy new feature, but I like it. The next thing I'm about to discuss could be the biggest or smallest added feature, depending on how you play Pokemon games. That is the two new battle modes, Triple Battles and Rotation Battles. These are both fun new modes that really shake up how battles are played. Triple Battles are pretty much how they sound, but the gimmick here is that the two Pokemon on the sides cannot reach opposing Pokemon on the opposite sides with their attacks. Rotation Battles are a bit more complicated. 3 Pokemon enter the battlefield, but only Pokemon at the front can attack. Each turn, both players' Pokemon can be rotated, making it so that you have to think ahead and predict whether your opponent will swap their Pokemon before you select a move. These battle formats are more complicated than single and double battles, so I don't think I necessarily prefer them, but they are a great alternative and a fun way to shake up traditional battles. Now, the reason why they may be the smallest added feature is the way they are implemented. If you're just playing through the single player, there's a good chance that you will never experience a single, triple or rotation battle, as there are very few trainers who take part in them. Even if you are the type of player who talks to absolutely every NPC, there is only a single trainer in Pokemon Black who will engage in a triple battle. Likewise, in Pokemon White there is only a single trainer who will take part in a rotation battle. Of course, if you're battling with your friends a lot, you can enjoy these new battle modes to your heart's content. If not, well, wait for the sequel. For some reason, Black and White also heavily reduced the amount of trainer double battles encountered throughout the single player. That one I really don't get and is a definite disappointment. The only major new feature that pertains to the overworld is seasons. The seasons will change in these games depending on what time of year you're playing. They have a nice visual effect on the world, changing the colour scheme to something warmer or colder to match the season. In some cases, new areas will be accessible if a trench is filled with snow, for example, or some parts of the world like Twist Mountain will have a different layout depending on the season. It's a really cool feature. However, I didn't get to experience half of the seasons during my playthrough as they rotate every month. That's certainly better than having to wait every 3 months to catch sight of some falling snow, but maybe waiting a whole month is still too long. If you were to play the games for a couple hours a day, you'd definitely be able to beat the game within one lunar cycle. I would have preferred if they reduced the seasonal rotation to maybe a week or a fortnight. Still, I know these games are designed to be played well beyond the credits, so I can't complain too much about this choice. Okay, now let's talk about the biggest new feature in the game, the Pokemon Musical. This feature is... whatever. They made away with Pokemon contests in Black and White. It is a shame, but I guess they just couldn't find anything more to do with the concept. So in its absence, we got the Pokemon Musicals. And it's probably unfair to compare these with the Pokemon contest, as the contest still required some strategy and had, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, gameplay. No, I can't rag on the musicals too much, they're cute. And I guess we needed a break from all the Pokemon liberating nonsense. To be honest, the Gen 5 games didn't really add a ton of new features. Their focus was mainly on just making another good Pokemon. And in order to make another good Pokemon game, they did take the opportunity to make a ton of quality of life improvements. Let's just work our way through the list. Battles are heavily sped up as health now drains at the same time the Pokemon is hit, plus the time it takes to drain is reduced. It's now possible to see the attributes and effects of a move right on the move selection menu by holding the L button before selecting a move. And finally, we can wave goodbye to the beeping. In Gen 5, if a Pokemon is on red HP, the music will change to a track that emotes emergency, which is much better than just beep beep, beep beep, beep beep. Are you blind? Beep beep, beep beep. Did you know you were low on health? Beep beep, beep beep. I wish that the music wouldn't change in story battles with unique music though, as it kinda ruins the moment. Up to 4 key items can be registered to the Y button at once, making for quick selection. I guess Game Freak realised that there were useful key items besides the bike. Doctors and nurses are new trainer classes. After defeating them, they will fully heal your Pokemon whenever spoken to. This doesn't really make the games easier, but makes it so you don't have to keep running back to the Pokemon Center to heal. The weather animation doesn't appear every turn in battle like it did in the past. Most of these changes help increase the speed and flow of the game. For an RPG where you'll spend a lot of time in battles or in one area, these convenient changes are most welcome. One change that does make the game easier is that TMs can now be used an infinite amount of times like HMs. So if you've got a really powerful move like Fire Blast, it can be taught to all fire Pokemon instead of just one. At first, I thought this change would negatively impact the games as you could easily create overpowered teams, but no, not really. In fact, in past games I found myself never using TMs because I didn't want to waste them. Now I can make use of them with no fear. Again, it's another change for convenience. And speaking of convenience, there are now only 4 HMs to obtain throughout the story, and only one of them is water. Thank God. The amount of HMs was getting out of hand, and I hate having to waste one of a Pokemon's 4 moves on a HM. Reducing the amount of HMs to 4 is way more manageable. Unfortunately, the 2 HMs that can be found in the post-game are water HMs. I at least like that one of the returning HMs is Dive, which brings back one of my favourite parts of the Gen 3 games, underwater diving. There's only one area that makes use of the HM, but it's an underwater treasure hunt. Sign me up. HMs aren't the only thing you'll find in the post-game, but also new Pokemon. Or, more specifically, old Pokemon. Yeah, for some reason, none of the old Pokemon are part of the Unova Pokedex, even though there are parts of Unova teeming with Pokemon across all 4 previous generations. What's weird about the post-game areas is that the trainers' Pokemon are immediately 10 levels higher than that of the Elite Four. I don't get why they did this. It makes it needlessly difficult to jump from the end of the game to the post-game, as you'll either need to spend a bunch of time grinding in older areas, or just feel constantly underpowered as you're exploring the new ones. Furthermore, if you're a fan of the additional story stuff in Gen 2 and Gen 4's post-game, you might be disappointed with Gen 5's. The post-game here is mostly about exploring new areas and catching new, or rather old, Pokemon. Or if you don't want to catch them, you can take the time to move Pokemon from the Gen 4 games into Black and White, in what is perhaps the most bizarre process of Pokemon transferring. It isn't possible to trade between the Gen 4 and 5 games. What you must do instead is visit the Poke Transfer Lab in Black or White. Then, on a separate DS with a Gen 4 game inserted, head into DS Download Play and download a special minigame. You then have to take the time to play through the tedious minigame in order to send and receive 6 Pokemon. You have to play the minigame 1 time for every 6 Pokemon you send. It's super boring. The Power Park in Gen 4 wasn't exactly a masterpiece, but at least it didn't take that much effort. The need for 2 DS systems was annoying enough. They could have at least done away with the annoying minigame. Something interesting about Black and White's post-game is that it has an exclusive area depending on which game you're playing. Black City for Black and White Forest for White. The Black City is an alright place. With each visit, new trainers will show up to battle. That's cool. And what about the White Forest? With each visit, new residents will show up, which allows the player to catch a whole bunch of exclusive Pokemon. I'm sorry, but one of these locations is clearly better than the other. Fans might be sad to see that Black and White did away with Emerald and Platinum's Battle Frontier. What we got instead was the Battle Subway, which serves a similar purpose but doesn't have some of the zanier rule sets that were part of the Battle Frontier. Some people might actually prefer this. It's a single player area where players can fight waves of trainers with competitive rule sets. You can compete in single battles, double battles, multi-battles, and not triple battles and rotation battles? Come on! Throughout this video, you may have noticed the text on the touchscreen during battles reading IR, online and wireless. Well, the devs were pretty ambitious and experimental with some of the communication features in Pokemon Black and White. And just in case you were wondering, even though the online light is constantly on, the Nintendo Wi-Fi features of these games are most definitely unavailable. No idea why it says I'm always online. Anywho, the Pokédex device from the Gen 4 games is no more. This time the touchscreen houses the C-Gear. The C-Gear merely provides a convenient way to jump into the many multiplayer features of these games. Firstly, let's talk about IR, short for infrared. The Pokemon games have messed around with IR many a time before. This time the IR technology built into the game card is only really used for easy pairing with another player. Point the DSs at each other and once they're paired, DS wireless communications handle the rest. IR is where you'll find your usual trading and battling. Oh, and there's a sweet new addition to multiplayer battles this time, the Wonder Launcher. Each turn, points are accumulated which can be spent on usable items. It's a decent way of incorporating items into multiplayer battles without making them feel unfair. Other than that, there's also this strange option, Feeling Check. Remember when I said the devs were being experimental? Yeah. I performed a feeling check for me and myself, and I scored a rank D, so I guess I have depersonalization disorder. Secondly, there's the wireless options, Intralink and X-Transceiver. We'll start with the latter. The X-Transceiver is, I don't want to say pointless, but it's pretty damn, foolish. It's just a way to do video calls with people over local wireless, so chances are you can see and hear them in the world outside of the DS anyway. I gotta say, this mode really demonstrated how much better the 3DS camera is to the DSi's. We'll talk about the online GameSync option and EntraLink at the same time as they share ties. GameSync was how players connected their games to the Pokemon Dream World, a browser-based game that I never took the time to try out before it shut down in January 2014. So I don't really know what I'm talking about, but I guess Pokemon Dream World was a game where you explored Pokemon dreams and played mini-games and grew berries. And I guess you could find Pokemon there that you couldn't in Black and White, and once you use the GameSync they end up in the EntraLink. That's one aspect of the EntraLink, but the other one is kind of wild. So the idea of the C gear is that the wireless communications are always active, even when you're just milling around doing single player. With the EntraLink, players can invade your game, Demon Souls style. Obviously they can't kill you, but they can show up, hand out pass powers, and complete dumb missions like talk to the person. It's really bizarre and pretty awesome that this existed in a Pokemon game on the DS. Which reminds me, Black and White did Street Pass before Street Pass was a thing. Being in the vicinity of someone else playing would pass around survey info of other players. Kinda pointless, but still, pretty damn cool. Pokemon Black and White are certainly interesting games. It's really hard for me to come to a solid conclusion on how I feel about them. On one hand, they have elements that are quite frankly unmatched, like the story, characters and music. On the other hand, the post-game is rather lackluster, and I don't really see why they took all previous Pokemon out of the main storyline. But with the new graphical features and the quality of life improvements, I do feel that the games do separate themselves enough from the Gen 4 games to justify a new generation on the DS. If you were upset at the time that Game Freak made these games for the DS rather than the 3DS, then boy have I got something to show you. You can't tell me that Game Freak weren't hesitant to take the plunge and finally give us a 3D Pokemon game. Black and White were cutting it close, but Black 2 and White 2 released on the DS more than a year after the 3DS was in our hands. Boy, they really wanted that Swansong. This was the first time we'd ever seen a direct sequel to a mainline Pokemon game within the same generation, and for that reason alone, Black 2 and White 2 are wholly unique. As these games are still within Gen 5, most of the battle systems, features, moves, and everything like that are pretty much the exact same. What isn't the same is that we can now catch non-Gen 5 Pokemon within the story. Yippee! It's basically how it was in the Gen 3 and 4 games. Most of the Pokemon encountered in Unova are Gen 5 Pokemon, but there are still plenty of others to get your hands on. It should have been like this in the originals. And we're back in the same region as we were before, Unova. Though the map has been slightly expanded this time around, with a few new areas. The whole bottom left side of the map is brand new, and it's where our new hero's hometown resides, as well as the first two gyms. In this journey throughout Unova, the new hero takes a different path to the previous one, which is something that I quite like. I also like most of the new areas. They fit within the established world of Unova, but there are some pit stops that feel unlike anything in the first games, like the Marine Tube and Strange House. Not many of the old locations have really changed at all, and there's a great sense of deja vu in that respect, except for the returning gyms, which have all seen a revamp, so at least they feel fresh. What really sets these games apart from the first ones is that the story is completely different. These sequels are set 2 years later and follow on from the amazing story of Black and White. Did it manage to stack up to what came before? Well... Let's start with what's good. All of the story parts that are continuations of things from Black and White are generally pretty good. It's kind of like when we re-explored Kanto in the Gen 2 games. Seeing what had changed in the time gap was exciting. It's the same here, but to a greater extent. Seeing what Sharon and Bianca ended up making with their lives was a pleasure. Oh, spoilers for Black and White, Sharon and Bianca don't die. Sorry for ruining that for you. But to be honest, I don't want to dive too deeply into the story of these games as to not spoil the first ones. I'll just say that Sharon and Bianca's arc is fulfilling. Team Plasma are interesting in these games. Again, it's fun to see the ramifications of the past game's conclusions. At some point it does feel like we're just seeing Team Plasma again, but as the story progresses, it's nice to see that this isn't really the case. What happened within the 2-year gap is explored through the new Memory Link feature. Linking with a copy of Black or White will have an effect on the world of Black 2 or White 2. The coolest part of this is the many flashback cutscenes that dive into the events that took place between the two games. You can even take part in certain battles that relate to choices made in Black or White. It's a great feature, but sadly Memory Link once again requires 2 DS's, just like the Poké Transfer. All this stuff is pretty good, but the area in which the story falls a bit flat for me is the new bits and pieces. For starters, this game's opening is fairly slow and unexciting. We're quickly introduced to the game's rival, Hugh. Opposite to Sharon and Bianca, Hugh is one of my least favourite rivals in the series. He copies the gung-ho nature of Barry from Gen 4, but he can be a bit of an arse to the people around him, even when they're trying to help him. His sole motivation is that Team Plasma stole his sister's purloin many years ago, and he will do anything to get it back. You've got to admire his determination, but outside of that, there really isn't anything to him. He's not a character that jived with me at all. The other major new character is Colrez the Scientist. This character's okay. I like his design at the very least. He does little to impact the story, only really playing the role of the observer, which is fine, but observers don't do a whole lot other than observe. Overall, my feelings on the story of the sequels are mixed. Returning characters have been handled well and faithfully, but there's just not a whole lot to get excited about with the new characters. Even though there was a fair amount that I did like, the highest highs in the game never came close to those in the first. Really, the story was the most important element of Black 2 and White 2, as so much of the rest of the games are very similar. But there are a few improvements in other areas. Small improvements include every trainer class now having an animation when a battle begins, and repels can now be used one after another without having to enter the menu every time. Then there are more substantial new features. The habitat list is an excellent addition for those who like to fill the decks, as it lets you track whether or not you've caught every kind of Pokemon in a specific area. There's the medal box, an achievement system. Nintendo refused to add an achievement system to their consoles, but are more than willing to sneak them into individual games for some reason. Once again, we have a new side activity for fans that want to do more with their Pokemon than make them fight to the death. This time it's the Pokestar Studios, a place where a trainer and its Pokemon can make movies. There's not really much to say here. It's got more gameplay than the musicals, I'll give it that, but it's nowhere near as meaty or fun as Pokemon contests. An old feature that saw a bit of a change in the sequels and a bit of a downgrade is the Entralink. It's still a hub for collecting your dream pals, but the ability to visit other players' worlds was removed. In fact, this is the only part of Black 2 and White 2 where players can't connect to owners of the first games. Instead, FunFest missions can be activated here and can be played solo or with nearby Black 2, White 2 owners. These missions see players running around their own game world completing objectives. It's not quite as interesting as the original implementation of Entralink, but to be fair, it wasn't exceptional before anyway, so it's not a major loss for Black 2 and White 2. These games also have exclusive access to Pokemon Dream Radar, a 3DS game that is essentially a paid version of Face Raiders. Unlike the Dream World, the Dream Radar can still be purchased and used. Players of this game will be able to find the exclusive Therian forms of Tornadus, Thundurus and Landorus, and this is the only way to get these Pokemon in Black 2 or White 2 without trading. Is it worth it? Man, it's legendary Pokemon, they're worth any price. I saved the best thing to talk about until last. The sequels do still have the Battle Subway, but they also contain something so much better, the Pokemon World Tournament. The Pokemon World Tournament is without a doubt the best new feature of these games. The PWT sees players participate in a knockout tournament with a competitive rule set. That might not sound like anything special, but you face off against Unova gym leaders, the other region gym leaders, and even past champions. The fights even come with new rearrangements of the different battle tracks. It's a lovely bit of fan service. And some people may prefer the shorter knockout style of tournaments to the gauntlet style challenges like the Battle Subway or past games Battle Frontier. I know I do. So, Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. They're certainly games that exist. They're not bad games, far from it. They're solid Pokemon games. My main issue is that half the time they don't feel like proper sequels. Half the time they feel like this generation's enhanced editions in disguise. There are a lot of parts of Black 2 and White 2 that feel incredibly similar, if not the same. The path through these games deviates a fair amount from the originals, but during the sections of the games where the path meets up, there is too much deja vu. I can kind of see why these games exist. Perhaps Game Freak wanted to make an enhanced edition, but decided that making a sequel in the same region with a new story and new locations would make people feel that they got more bang for their buck. But in so doing that, they ended up making something that I feel is just not as good as the original. What's frustrating about this is that there are some definite improvements in the sequels, plain as day. Black 2 and White 2 make up for areas that the originals were lacking in, but drops the ball in others. If they made an enhanced edition of the original Black and White, they could have put some of the cool new areas and the Pokemon World Tournament into that, as well as made the older Pokemon available to us from the start. If they had done that, we could have ended up with the perfect 5th generation Pokemon game. Looking back, Generation 5 is probably the strangest generation. As it stands, I still think that the original Black and White are worth experiencing for the story alone, and if you like them, consider checking out Black 2 and White 2 as well, I guess. Anyway, I've taken up a lot of your time. This was definitely a challenging video to make, and I thank you for making it all the way through this one, if you did. Go check out my Twitch and Twitter, subscribe to the channel, and have fun playing video games.